Hi, my name's Luke. Thanks for watching. This video is going to show you how to set up your MacBook, or really any PC. It doesn't have to be a MacBook, that's just what I'm using, to kickstart a Red Hat or CentOS installation on a remote server. We're also going to use the repository on the Mac to install the to make the installation, so we don't have to have a CD and point it to a CD and have all that specific. So we can use a bootable USB to boot to a point to where we can start the Kickstart and basically walk away for the most part. So first thing, let me show you. I want to show you how to set up your system. So again, I'm using a Mac, so I'm gonna use that as my example, but this would apply to anything that can host a web server. So if you're using Windows, install something like, I think it's called WAMP, and you can have your own web server up and running, and you can basically mimic what I'm doing. Mac Yosemite is what I'm running here. Actually comes with a built-in web server, so all I have to do is just point and put my folders and files in the right place. So let me show you how to do that. First of all, by default, that web server resides in your main hard drive. So let's click there to get to the hard drive. And then it's under Library. And then it's under Web Server. From Web Server to Documents. So Documents is like the root of the web server. So if I were to go to HTTP and then the IP address of my Mac, the first message I would get would be this index.html. That's the page that I would get. So anything below that, like any folder, would be a /kickstart or /RHEL6 or / whatever it may be. So that's the first place I want to start. I want to take my Red Hat 6 repository, you know, what I downloaded from Red Hat or CentOS, and I want to dump it in this RHEL6 directory. So here's basically my unpackaged ISO disk that I'm going to drop in this RHEL6. So there's all my files, everything's there, sorted the way it comes from CentOS. Now once this is there, that's where I can point my installation to and say, go get all your files from here, not from the CD, but get it from this MacBook, from this web server, I should say. The next thing I want to do is I want to create a Kickstart folder. It doesn't have to be named Kickstart, but let's keep it simple. Let's call it Kickstart, and I'm going to put my Kickstart files in there. So the way I've named them is just how I chose to do it. It's totally up to you, but I will tell you that it needs to end in .cfg. That's the extension that it needs. But let's take a little closer look at one of these Kickstart files. Let's look at server 06, and I'll bring that up. Let me see if I can shrink it in here so you can see it. So this is my Kickstart file. This is just basically a set of directives that I'm passing to the installer to say, put all this stuff in there. You don't need to ask me these questions. This is what I want. This is how I want it installed. So this basically tells the installer, once I've booted, go find this Kickstart file, reference this, install it, and pull your files from here. So let's kind of walk through this real quick. So first of all, I'm doing an install on a brand new system. So pretty simple. We're going to say install. Here's the next piece that's important. I want to do a network installation, meaning I'm pulling it from an HTTP server. So here I'm going to point it to my RHEL6 folder where you saw me dump in the ISO image, or the unpackaged ISO image. So I'm saying network installation, use this URL, and then this happens to be my MacBook / that folder, and then a / to say look in this directory, you'll find everything you need. Set my keyboard layout to US. I do want to reboot after installation. If you don't put this in, it will stop at the very end and ask you, to hit enter to say, okay, yes, reboot the system and bring it up with these new settings. I don't need to worry about that. I just want it to reboot on its own and let it do that. The next piece I want to put in is a root password. Now in my case I've got it crypted, but you could also do root pw -- plain text and then the password, and that will be just fine too. I just don't want to show the root passwords on this video just for obvious reasons. Set my time zone, set my system language. In my case, I have a very specific application I'm going to install that actually requires, I shouldn't say requires, but they suggest that the firewall is disabled upon installation. So I'm going to say firewall disabled. Then I want to set my network information. So I'm going to put everything about my network in here. I want to say it's you know, what device I'm setting, what its gateway is, IP, name server, net mask, all of that information. Now one thing to note, that has to be all on one line. If it's not on one line, it'll screw up the Kickstart file and you'll get an error. Next thing, I'm going to use Shadow, which is a pretty default thing to use. I will be using the graphical install. I have first boot disabled. That just means there's a little setup script that runs after you do your first boot and does some, it's almost like tutorial type of stuff or basic setup, additional setup. We don't need that. We're setting everything up here. We're going to say first boot disabled. Again, with the application that I'm installing, it requires SE Linux to be disabled at the beginning of the installation. So I'll just start that here, SE Linux disabled. I want to set my bootloader to be on the master boot record. I want to clear the master boot record because I'm doing a fresh, brand new install, as well as clear the partitions, set the initial labels, and then auto partition here is what you're seeing here. So this auto part is just saying let the installer take the whole disk and do what it's supposed to do with the partition. I'm not setting any specific partitioning. Last piece is I want to set some particular packages to be installed. So Core will be installed, which is basically like a minimal CentOS or Red Hat installation. Also need curl for my for the application that I'm going to be installing later. So I'll just set that to install now, and that'll be ready for when I boot it up. So that's really all there is to it. I'll just save this file, make sure it's in this Kickstart directory, and then I'll be pointing to that when I do my install. So before I get to that, I'll kind of discuss what I'm going to do. I'm going to boot my server using a bootable USB drive. So I'm just going to boot it as though I was installing it. When I get to that install screen, I'm going to press the tab button so I can enter a command. And I'm going to enter the command ks equals and then the URL path to my Kickstart file that I'm going to use for that server. I'm going to show you that I recorded in person with my phone. I'll warn you, it's poor quality, but you at least get to see what happens and how you do it and how you start it. So you don't wonder when do I push tab, where do I enter this command. I'll show you that in this upcoming video, but I will warn you one more time, it's not the greatest quality, so be prepared. Okay, I told you this would be bad quality, but in this case what I've done is I've booted to my USB and I'm going to press tab on this install or upgrade, and I'm just going to add a second command, which is ks equals. Now I'm going to put in the URL of my MacBook and the absolute path to the Kickstart file that I'm going to want to use. So I'm going to put in my IP address of my Mac, and then /kickstart, that's the folder in which I've put all these in, and then another slash for the actual config file. So in this case I'm working on server3-ks.cfg. Once I've got that, I'll press enter and it'll pause for a moment, and then it should go ahead and continue with the boot and start the install. So it'll go through some of its stuff, loading. You'll see a bunch of garbage kind of go across the screen. Not really much to worry about here. You'll know your Kickstart is working if you get to the next screen and it starts to do the install. Now in my case I have one step that I have to make because I have multiple NICs. So you're going to see that here in just a minute, where I have to tell it which NIC to use in order to find the network that the MacBook is on. So you'll see that in just a moment. Okay, so there it is. It's asking me which network do I want to use. In my case, it's ETH0. That's what I'm physically plugged into. So all I have to do is press enter, and Network Manager starts to configure the network so that I can actually talk to the same network as the MacBook. And you should see it kick off here in just a minute. It does pause on this blue screen for maybe, I don't know, 10 to 15 seconds. And you're not sure if it's working, but as long as you're not getting errors, then everything's working at this point. If you did get errors, they typically pop up at the bottom of the screen, and they're usually pretty straightforward. It'll give you a line number and say, this line number command is invalid, you know, something like that, to tell you, hey, this Kickstart file is not correct, or it has an incorrect command passed to it. So as long as we're just sitting here and not getting errors, so far everything's good. Let's see if we can move on to the graphical install part. You can see it just do its thing without me having to touch it. And there it goes. So it found the installation media. That's the media that's actually on my MacBook, and it's starting to boot and do the install. So this will be kind of small. You won't be able to see it, but you can see that I'm not pressing buttons. It's not asking me questions. It's just silently installing based on what I told it to install. So at this point, we know our Kickstart's good because it hasn't failed. It would have pre-validated all of these settings. And if I missed something and didn't set a required package, it would come back here and ask me and require my input on one of these. So if I skipped perhaps, say, the keyboard operand, it would come back and ask me what type of keyboard are you going to use, and I'd have to press enter. So if your Kickstart file is set up correctly, once you kick this thing off, you can walk away. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. This is all working. There's the install. At this point, not much else to see. So I'm going to walk away, and that's all there is to it.